Games mean everything to me. Two things that mean everything to me are games and languages. They're just ways to connect with other people, see how other people's brains work.
You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Tiara. Tiara is a language lover working as a freelancer in South Korea. She co-hosts a language exchange in Daegu and is on the path to create a language school for adults online and in person. Tiara, I'm so happy to have you with us today. How are you?
I am great. That is a fantastic bio. Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to talk with you today.
Me too. We have so much to talk about, and I want to get into it. And I want to be respective of our time difference. I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language, and which languages have you learned to speak?
Awesome. Well, the first language that I used is English. This is my native language. And the second language was Spanish. The third was Italian. And then the fourth was actually Latin, and then ancient Greek. And then it went into other languages like Korean and Japanese and a bunch of other stuff here or there. But I dare not say all of them right now.
I think those of us in language tend to get into a lot more than we could really sum up, right?
Exactly.
So I think that's so interesting that you started Spanish, Italian, and then you got to Latin. So tell me a bit about what that was like, because Latin, well, I'll tell you, for me, was my
Mhm.
foundation for Italian, for Spanish, for
Oh,
French. So I'm really curious to know, how was it coming to the foundation of it, like after studying those two?
so it was the hardest transition to go from the little bit of Italian that I had before Latin, and then later I picked Italian up again in university. So there was like 6 months of me focusing really hard on Italian on back then's Duolingo. And then I started Latin classes in my religion class when I was in a Catholic high school. And that was kind of an independent study that turned into a real class. And so that was cool. But going into Latin, I thought, oh, this is where the Spanish word comes from. So I was really connected with Spanish at that time. So I found it fun because I was like, okay, I can see the connection, but it's not as similar as Italian is. So that by the time I picked up Italian again in college, and I was like, oh, I think this is going to help me. I found myself writing full Latin sentences in my Italian class and then
Wow.
coming to because I took both classes in my freshman year, in the
Mhm,
first semester of
mhm.
college. And
Right.
so, was that the mistake? Yes, absolutely. Doing two very similar languages and expecting to get away with both. There was one time the Italian teacher told me, like, this isn't wrong, but this isn't what I taught you. And you know this. So it,
Wow.
it was definitely a wake-up call, and maybe it helped and hurt to learn both. But it was a very frustrating experience trying to separate the two for some of the endings, for nouns, or I mean, there was just some very frustrating parts that I remember for the first year, Italian and Latin, and I had to pick one, and I was just in love with Latin, so I had to cut one off.
Oh
Mhm.
man. So Italian got the
Yeah, it was frustrating. And then I brought it back a third time, my senior year of university, and I was like, okay, I'm better now because I've done all the work for Latin and I'm ready to actually speak a language now. And so it worked out that way, but man, that's a
That's
great question.
Yeah, that's so that I think that's really interesting. I really wanted to study Latin on the university level, and I was discouraged from doing so. by an advisor.
Oh, really?
I know, right? I know. And this advisor said to me, "Well, nobody speaks Latin, so you should just take Italian because it's the closest thing anyway." And I'm 18, so I said, "All right, whatever."
Yeah,
I mean, I got something great out of it. I got an Italian education, but still, I loved Latin so much.
that's such a shame.
And it was really a
Mhm.
shame. What were some things that you were finding that you really enjoyed about learning Latin and things that you felt connected to with the language?
You know, the crazy thing is, it was so difficult to me
Mm,
that I wanted to learn it. I love puzzles, I love math, I love being able to figure out what people are trying to say. So games like Taboo or Charades were really interesting to me because everyone has a different way of getting to the solution. So you gotta use their experiences with you or the way that they could have experienced life to really be good at those kind of games. A
mhm.
person, but I'm also someone that really wants other people to feel heard. And that took forever for me to be able to put into words. And so Latin was a language where it was like, I don't understand this sentence. And my worst class was Latin in high school, or being able to do my independent study and go to the religion teacher and say, okay, how well was my translation? There was always red marks on my sentences. Spanish or other language classes, maybe not so much, because again, I'm interested in them. And if you study enough, then you could make a natural sentence because it's spoken.
Mhm.
But those dead languages, there's so many translations and there's so many ways you could get it right, but way more ways that you could miss one word or say one word wrong. And those Latin and ancient Greek, they have so many meanings for one word. And
Mm,
we'll never be able to ask a native, like, could this be right? You know?
right.
So it depends on the teacher. And most of my teachers were also really passionate about Latin, but they each had their own principles of how they grade, even. And so the more interested I got into Latin, the more frustrating it was for me. So I found myself running from my math and science and history homework and just spending hours doing Latin. And at some point, you become addicted to the pain. That's the t-shirt for my major, honestly. Like, because then after some time with Latin, after I already conquered the I can't have Latin and Italian book, my Latin teacher was like, you should take ancient Greek. And I
Mm,
had experienced ancient Greek in high school as well. But I
mhm.
was like, should I do it again? And I did.
What was that transition like going from Latin to ancient Greek?
It kind of happened at the same time. And you
Okay.
know what? Ancient Greek was the first time that I got interested in a language with a different writing system.
Mm,
Because in my religion class, all of the posters were in Latin and ancient Greek. But the ancient Greek wasn't the capital, alpha, beta, delta symbols that we're used to for fraternities or sororities. It was sentences in this beautiful handwriting that I didn't know. And I asked my teacher, what was it? And he said ancient Greek. But it was all the lowercase letters. And a lot of people don't know what the lowercase letters of ancient Greek look like until they actually get exposed to it from surprisingly video games or other things.
okay.
And so when you see lowercase ancient Greek, it's so pretty. And I thought the handwriting or the script just looked so nice. So I started ancient Greek because I was interested in the handwriting. And then I actually got a religious book that actually went through the texts of the New Testament that were written in ancient Greek. So I was translating that on the side. And I realized a lot of the words were very similar for Latin and ancient Greek
Okay.
because there was a lot of mixing happening there.
Mm,
And so sometimes words were borrowed in between the two languages, and that was fun. And then the grammar structure was very similar.
okay.
So the dative case or the accusative case, like those cases, I've already experienced it with Latin. So with ancient Greek, it didn't feel like a tough thing to get over. And so the verbs being towards the end or the verbs being anywhere in the sentence, it wasn't as shocking. And then later it helped with other languages too. And
Yeah.
so I got into both at the same time from my religion teacher. And I always thank him for it. I hope he's out there just like, at least one person asked about these posters because at the time I was the weird one, just like, give me a book about this so I can learn how to write it. So that's how it started.
When you were translating texts, were they religious texts that you were in your independent study that you were translating, or were they other types of like Homer or
Mhm.
Virgil type of epic poetry?
So believe it or not, this is one of my favorite questions that I don't think other people have ever asked me because for my Latin class, the textbooks were from the original Latin classes that were in my private school years before I got there. So maybe about 25 or 30 years ago, there was a Latin teacher that used to teach there. And then they stopped and they didn't find another one, or maybe they cut the program. So they had the textbooks in the school, but no one was using them. So my
Mhm.
religion teacher kept a series of them and he let me borrow them. And then because I was interested in it, there was another religion teacher who was willing to teach it. And then there were a few students that joined with me. So the textbook for Latin wasn't religious. It was actually really fun. Then it followed a Roman family. Like maybe you remember your language classes and it's like following a story throughout the textbooks each year. So you feel
Yes.
like you're connected with the characters. So it
Yeah.
did feel like I was going through a language class. So I
Mhm.
had finished the first two books for for my Latin independence study. And when they created the Latin class, we redid the first book because the other
Okay.
students weren't interested in it. But it was cool because it felt like a real review for me. And so, whereas before I just had direct feedback, but it wasn't like I was practicing it or able to talk with other people about it. For the ancient Greek textbook, the very first one I had was the one for translating texts of the New Testament.
Okay.
And so that was a book that I was following, and there was no one to teach me ancient Greek. So, other than that book, I didn't have anything until I took ancient Greek in university.
Okay. Self-taught ancient Greek. I love that.
Yeah, that's cool, right?
That's so cool.
Because of the handwriting.
Yeah, it's so cool that that nugget led you, it's like all these seeds that we plant along our life, and then later in life we get to see how they grow or where they grow and what fruit they bear. It's
Right?
so cool.
Right? And I'm telling you, I never would have thought about doing other languages with different writing systems if it wasn't for ancient Greek.
Mm,
And then at the same time, surprisingly, ancient Greek has a lot of similarities to Korean,
okay.
whereas there were some things that didn't surprise me as much as it would have if I just never had been exposed to Latin or ancient Greek.
I was going to ask you, how do you or how have you noticed as years have gone on that Latin and Greek, ancient Greek, have shown up in your life? Like how, and that could be, for me, it's always with Latin, for me, it's always when I'm able to understand the meaning of a word that I've never seen
Hmm.
before. And I'm like, oh, this reminds me of whatever word in Latin that I remember from high
Yeah.
school. But that's just my experience with it. But for you, do you have any stories about how they've shown up maybe unexpectedly or in ways that have surprised you?
In fact, your experiences are very similar to mine for many reasons, but I take that in so many different ways because between Latin and ancient Greek, the grammar that's in those two languages alone I've experienced it in every language that I've learned after that. And so it's very hard to surprise me with explaining a grammar term. Or even my most recent language I'm studying now is German, right? And so now German has some verbs that are at the end of the sentence and some in the middle, and it's like nothing surprises me. Then they have the neuter case. And the neuter case could scare people in some ways, but for Latin or ancient Greek, there's a neuter case. So
Yeah.
that doesn't surprise me. It's like, oh, you just, so at least some languages still have it. And then there's some that use a dative case or something like, there's not much that surprises me. Or grammar, which is a great advantage for me, but it's also, it feels like those two languages are not dead because there's some parts of those grammar points that are still living in some languages.
Yeah.
And not necessarily meaning that Latin and ancient Greek are like the first languages ever, but at the same time, a lot of the languages that are dead come from people finding easier ways to communicate.
Mm,
But some people found some parts of languages like those dead languages that were, still made sense. And I
yeah.
could agree with some parts of one language and some parts of another language. Whereas I'm like, English is beautiful. But I know that there's some things that would make life easier, like sounds making the same sound. And then that's where Spanish comes in. But then I also like Italian's use of conjugating the verbs. And then for Korean, I like that there's extra ways to make a sentence because there's so much meaning in every part of the word. And so I just love every part of every language
Yeah.
because of those ancient languages.
Right.
But the funny part is that I do see some Latin words and some ancient Greek words here in Korea too on the signs because there's a lot of, cafes or a
Mm,
lot of places where they want to catch people's attention. And so it's pretty easy to find a lot of stores and cafes in some other languages, and even if I'm not 100% sure it's Latin, I'm quite sure it's Latin because I'm seeing a word that's definitely not English or Spanish or Italian.
I just love what you said about, maybe these languages aren't dead because they still live on through other languages and through, at least grammatically.
Right?
And I think that's so special, and especially to the people who say, who cares about these languages because they're dead. They're not dead.
Right. They're
They,
not.
they live on and we love them. Tell me about Korean. I would love to hear your experience with learning Korean and living and learning the language in Korea. What has your experience been like? And tell me if there's anything about the language that you found particularly interesting. I'd love to hear all about that and your experience with it.
That's another awesome question, I swear. But my time, so how I got to the point where I wanted to come to Korea is still crazy for me, and it probably changes a little bit every time I say it. So my parents or friends are probably like, "But you said," and I'm like, "There's so many reasons."
Mm,
So between middle school and high school, there's a lot of culture days or culture weeks that happen, and I was always a part of a different cultures club every time. And so one year I was for the Caribbean, another year I was for Europe, and then I did Asia. And then there was always some kind of song that was from Korea, and then another one from Japan, and another one from China, which excuse our ignorance, but back then those were the main three countries we think of when we think of Asia, right?
mm,
And so I kept hearing songs that were Korean, but I didn't know that they were Korean. I just knew that they were Asian at the time. And then high school comes, and then my senior year of high school, the Catholic school shut down. So I went to a public school in a different city. So new city, new school, senior year,
senior
worst situation
year.
ever.
Yeah.
I went from like 23 students in my grade to like 600 students in my grade.
Whoa.
I, in every sense of the word, it was new, but I just didn't want to start over, right? And so going into this new public school, I saw a bunch of different cultures in the same space for the first time. And so I joined the Asian club. I don't know the official name of it at that time, but I'm quite sure it was just called the Asian Club. And so we went in there and I met Korean Americans or Japanese Americans. Even there were some representation of Vietnamese American, Philippine American people there. And so it was just like, wow, they do exist in New Jersey, right? So that was my chance to first get exposed to other cultures and be able to say where they're from.
Mm.
And then in high school too. Was it high school or college that Netflix started becoming popular? But there was a show called Hidden Singer, and Some people are probably tired of me talking about the show, but it is my favorite show of all time next
Okay.
to Running Man. It is so good, and you should
Okay.
run to it if you're even a little bit interested. So, Hidden Singer has these iconic, like, think Gladys Knight or think like Whitney Houston level Korean important singers. So every episode is a singer like Whitney Houston that would come on, and there's five other singers that sound just like them. And so they put them behind the doors and they sing parts of the song. So imagine it's I Look to You, right? So each of them sing a part of the song, like two lines each. And then the audience has to vote for who is not the real singer.
Okay.
And then slowly it gets down to the final three, including the real singer and two others. So I watched all six seasons of it. I thought that that concept was so creative. It
Uh-huh.
took me until towards the end of season two to realize that there's a lot of beautiful things about Korean culture that I was interested in. And so imagine like hours of listening to different Korean artists that I would have never known without the show. So got into that before I thought I'm going to Korea. So in college, I'm studying Latin, ancient Greek, Italian, linguistics. I studied abroad in Italy. I told my parents I'm going to Korea or Japan to teach English. Of course, my parents don't understand what I'm saying,
Uh-huh.
right? And so I came to Korea with a mission because of my background. I could understand a lot of languages, at least have a head start in a lot of languages in the US or South America or even in Europe. And so all of these things really made me feel like if I want to feel like an alien and understand what my future English students would look like, because I was interested in English ESL in the US, like
Mm-hmm.
for Spanish learners and stuff, I need to feel what it
Yeah.
would be like.
Yeah.
So Korea or Japan for me, because I don't even know what these languages look like,
Right.
right?
Right.
Come to Korea, I can only read, but one of the first memories of coming to Korea is going to Burger King. And the Burger King menu is the spelling is the same as English, but just in Korean.
Oh,
So
cool.
Whopper is a Whopper, but the pronunciation's a little different. So I
Yeah.
go and it's like, okay, Whopper 랑 아이스크림랑 프렌치 프라이 주세요. But at that time, it was way worse. And then the waiter, the cashier was like, what? Like one more time? I just pointed at the pictures on the
Okay.
menu. It was that bad.
Oh no.
So when I came, I didn't have much experience with Korean, but right away, I had co-teachers. I ended up studying a lot because of my students. One of my co-teachers didn't show up to my classes, so I had to create the worksheets and slideshows because I'm by myself with 25 students that might understand what I'm saying, but they got to pass a test in 4 months. So
Right.
I had to learn fast.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Would I say it took 2 years to at least feel comfortable talking to others? Yes. But life in Korea has been really fun, and there's so many aspects of it that are good. Students are fun, co-teachers, most of them were really, really nice. And of course, I met my husband here, so that was also another bonus. And some of the best memories of my life have been in Korea, to be honest.
That's wonderful. So how long has it been that you've been in Korea?
It's going on 6 years now.
6
So
years. I love that in your story and you're talking about, you're coming out of school and you did your study abroad, but then you're saying you want to go to either Korea or Japan and you were willing, it sounds to me, you can correct me, of course, if I'm getting this wrong, but it sounds to me like you had a real spirit of adventure that you wanted to go and start something completely new and change course, but also you had confidence. I want to ask you kind of what were you feeling? Like were you feeling like you had that confidence because it's coming across like you did? Were you feeling confident? Were you feeling armed? Were you feel like I could take on anything? No matter where I went, I know I'll leap and I'll build my parachute on the way down. Was that the kind of attitude that you had at that time? Is that your general attitude when you're approaching new situations?
You know, I really, really love this question so I could say it out loud for multiple people to hear because it's so great that I can give the vibe of confidence. And even where I am now with doing the language exchange or other things, people think that I'm confident. And in reality, I was so nervous the whole time. I knew I had to do it. And that's the one part of my story that I feel people get bits and pieces of for how I got to Korea. I had a mission in my head. I had a feeling in my heart where I knew that I needed to grow somewhere else. If I
Mm,
wanted to be a really good teacher, I feel like, yes, I could have gone the extra year into university and then done teaching in the US. And I could have been an ESL teacher, but I don't think I would have had the passion for teaching language in the US versus doing so outside first, which ended up being the place where I stayed long term. So at the time, I was really anxious. Do I want to spend extra money for this extra year in the US to be a teacher? Because you got to get a master's degree to teach in the US, right?
mhm.
I mean, to
Yeah.
teach in New Jersey at least.
Yeah.
Every state's different. So
Mhm.
do I want to spend that extra money, invest in that extra year of being in the school system and doing this extra stuff and possibly being on field, right? Or do I really dig into the experience first and then possibly come back and work on that or do whatever I need to do to figure out my goals?
Mhm.
And I had always said I wanted to do a language school. I wanted to start a language school. I didn't know where. And then I had always said that I wanted to really feel what my students would feel. There was a time I thought I was going to be a math teacher. It doesn't take an experience out of the US to be a math teacher. But when I realized I wanted to be a language teacher, I'm like, no, there's frustration that
Mm,
happened with every language I learned,
right.
but that can't compare to a family that just came to the US months ago and they're frustrated to even order French fries. If
Mm,
I didn't have that burger experience, how in the world could I encourage my students to get through it when they
mhm,
can't understand me or, I just thought really deeply like that. So, because of what I knew I wanted to do, I knew I had to get out of my comfort zone eventually.
mhm.
Like it was something calling me. Like, is it really Hidden Singer? I don't know if I'm gonna
That's
even go
so
there.
funny.
It is.
Imagine if it was just Hidden Singer and then you got there and was like, oh.
Exactly, exactly.
Something I picked up on that you said is that you were listening to a calling. You were following a calling that you felt. And I'm going to throw a Latin rooted word in here, vocation.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I like how when we and this is what one of the things I think is so cool about Latin is, we hear the word vocation, I think a lot in English, and we think vocational school, you're going to go and fix air conditioners, or you're going to go work on
Mhm.
cars, or you're going to do something what we would call blue collar, which as we know is no less than anything else. Like those jobs deserve respect and they are very uh
Mhm.
they're not easy,
Very hard.
respect to all the blue collar workers out there, but also vocation, thinking of it in the sense of Latin, it's your calling. It's what you are called to do. It's you know, what is being called. I cannot remember the infinitive of the word right now to save my life, Tiara. Oh my God. I just jotted
Let
down
me tell you
vocation
what.
and I'm like, is it vocare? I'm just
Mm,
guessing right now and I cannot figure it
um, I don't know who needs to hear this,
out.
but when I say language is frustrating, it was my major, and I cannot tell you to this day.
I know. And it will always escape your brain in the last minute. And if there are any Latinists listening to this
Yeah,
episode, I'm sorry.
exactly.
Could just look it up. Hold on. Vocation, Seymour, origin, vocare.
It is.
Yeah.
It is Bocare. Yes.
Latin to call.
Yeah.
And it came into Old French and Latin. Uh yes.
There
All
we
right.
go.
All right.
See? We're getting there.
We're getting
We're
there.
getting
I'm a
there.
lot
We're
rustier
getting
than you are,
You
so
did
I'm
that. No, you did that. I wasn't even gonna try. I was at one point when you said vocari, I was like, I think that could be Latin and Italian, but I was like, no, is it Latin or Italian? So I was like, I'm not even gonna touch it. You had it. You called it out.
we
So
we
there's
did
that.
it. We figured it out. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so funny because like you, I'm also I love games. I love puzzles. We'll talk about that in a moment, but I wanted to really talk about, you having this sense of awareness and your calling and the sense of awareness to understand that, hey, if I'm going to be an effective teacher, I need to know how my students are feeling and I need to know what they're going through as they're on this language journey with your students, and also let us know how old they are or the age range that you teach. But you had this awareness going into it. Have you seen it in action? Have you had moments where you've been able to coach a student or help a student through ordering french fries at Burger King or something like that, where you've been able to
Mm-hmm.
utilize the awareness that you had going into the situation initially?
Absolutely. So this is a perfect example because I feel like if I were to be in an ESL room in the US without this experience and I write stuff on the board in Spanish and English, for example, and it's wrong and they laugh, that would just discourage me, right? Because, we're trained to feel like we have to get things right.
Mhm.
Whereas in Korea, I have no bone to stand on, especially my first couple of years. And even now, I could mess up a word. There's some sounds that I can't tell the difference, and then I write it one way, and I am 70% wrong with
Mhm.
writing. And so my students laugh at me, a whole class laughing at me because they all speak the same language and I don't. And so I would write a word thinking I'm helping them because they don't know the word in English. So I tried to find the Korean, and then all the worksheets that I made in my first year here, I have made at least 5 mistakes in each of them if I even dared to use a Korean word in there. But you know what it did? It allowed them to teach me.
Mm,
And that was something that I always wanted to do in the classroom, where even if it was math, even if I was in the US, I would try to make mistakes on purpose so that this way they had the confidence to remember teacher could be wrong too.
yeah.
So that's what I tell my students all the time. And so they really impacted my Korean. I would say without my students, I would not be confident today. But I also feel like they could say the same about me. They
Mm,
saw my mistakes, they saw my frustration. There were times where I was just tearing up in the cafeteria because I didn't know how to ask for stuff. And I didn't have the best relationship with one of my co-teachers to the point where even my students could feel that. Again, they didn't even show up to my class. So here I am trying to make students feel comfortable. I'm freaking out in the classroom, praying that everyone can at least understand I'm doing my best. And so, them being able to see my honest reaction to language opened up that space where they don't feel as shy and they have power in the classroom too. And I saw that in action from my own experience.
yeah.
Whereas if I tried that in the US, then, eh, I don't know what I would have felt. Maybe I would have done the same, maybe not. Most likely not, because how could I be in their shoes? And so that was one way where I definitely felt it. Another way was because there were some students that were isolated in the classroom or isolated in their grade that would come to me during lunchtime or even after school to talk to me. With the limited English, they would still tell me their situation. And with my limited Korean, I would try to encourage them. So it would be like a student coming to me and saying, Teacher, I sad. And I'm like, why? And they're like, Teacher, English test, no. And I'm like, no. And they show me that they got not a good score.
Yeah.
And then I'm just like, oh, 괜찮아, it's okay. Or like, "Oniyashima, don't worry." And then they're like, "Teacher, thank you." And I would later, I would write a little thing that I found from like a translator app, and I would try to write the message. But of course, the translator app was not the one that native people use. So it was
Mm.
giving Google Translate, and I would give it to them, and they would laugh. And they would say, "Thank you, teacher." And then a week later, they would write something in Google Translate and give it to me. And I would laugh and I would say, "Good job." There's just moments like that that you can't make up where I feel like it impacts the students. And even just tearing up thinking about how many times that happened. Like, it's such an emotional language or an emotional language journey for me because a lot of the other situations came from, I'm just interested in it. But it was such a deep meaning for me to be able to help people in that situation.
As you were talking, one thing I was jotting down, not in Latin this time, but you gave your students agency. You gave your
Mhm.
students agency and comfortability, and you giving them confidence also. And I always kind of hinge on confidence because that's something that I struggled with. I know a lot of people struggle with finding confidence and feeling confident to make mistakes. That's an important part of it. It's not just getting everything right and being perfect. You got to get dirty and make mistakes, and being able to give that to your students in Korean is really really wonderful. I would love to know, as you had the experience with the talent show before you got to Korea, and then once you got there, what were some things that you were finding that you loved about the culture? What were some things you were finding that surprised you, or something that was different when you're looking at it here versus when you got there? What were some of those experiences like for you?
You know, some of the little things that I really loved when I first came here was just like, it's so silly. But when you give things or receive things to show extra respect, you should use two hands. Or if you can't use two hands, then you would put your left hand over your right. Um, over your upper arm and give it so that this way it shows extra respect for the item that you are giving or receiving.
Yeah.
And so for the first 6 months, I was almost frustrated because whenever I would give paper to my students, they receive it with two hands. Like they would even put their pencil down in order to receive it with two hands. Or
Okay.
sometimes even the teacher would scold them if they only like took it with one hand sometimes. Or like if they drop their pencil, just imagine a pencil is on the floor. They pick it up, give it to me like this. A pencil, you know?
Mm.
Or even for getting a receipt from the shop when you're shopping or receiving the bag when you're shopping, most of the time you'll see it being received with two hands. And
Mhm.
so, in our brains, it's like, isn't that uncomfortable? But it's just something that they've been used to ever since they're young.
Yeah.
I love that in a way. And I kind of, when I was back at home for a few months, it took some time to not do that and not feel so weird to give like my credit card with two hands. Like,
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
so like
Okay.
imagine the size of things and like I'm doing this and sometimes, it
Mm.
could definitely stand out. Whereas
Yeah.
if it's a big bag, then, it could make sense. But
Mhm.
and so that was one thing. Another thing that I really love is ordering food or going out to eat here. One, no tip or tax. What you see is what you get. I love that. But more than that is a lot of the time you'll get a bunch of side dishes along with your food. You only ordered the food, but you get a lot of other side dishes, and it shows how kind Korean culture is, or just how concerned they are about making sure you're full. And sometimes you even have a self bar for being able to add extra side dishes. And you could also request for more if you needed more.
Yeah.
And so to the point where even if you're ordering a stew in a stew restaurant, sometimes the bowl of rice comes for free. Whereas we're the first to add that side dish
$2
rule.
for an extra bowl of rice.
Yeah, or it's just things like that where you don't think about it as like it of course it's nice for your wallet, but it's also like culturally and even in their experience like to ask like how are you? Sometimes it's also natural to ask, did you eat? And so, even to that extent, they really care about your health. Another thing that I really like as far as the culture when I came here is that they're really open to understanding other cultures if you once you sit and talk with them.
Mm.
And so it's a really interesting experience to sit in a taxi and the taxi driver asks questions, but times the questions are like really deep. It's not just about where you're from, what is this? It's like they'll ask you questions about, when is your family coming? What does your family like about X, Y, or Z? And it's, simple enough where you're just like, wow, they would like to know more about America or wherever you're from more than just, I'm from here, I do this, I do that. There was a time I got into the same taxi twice. Like, it's pretty rare for that to happen, that I ended up with the same taxi driver. And the second time, he not only remembered everything, but he had a little thing with some extra questions if he ever met me.
Oh,
And that was such a special taxi ride. Like,
that's
there's
so
just some
sweet.
moments like that where he is just trying to understand, like, why Black people are Black people and
Mm.
not, like, so it was a deeper question like that, even. And I was impressed that an older taxi driver was able to have that conversation with me.
Hmm. Is that something that you have experienced questions about, conversation about often in the time you've been in Korea about being Black American?
That is an episode too. I'm just kidding. But there's so much. There's pros and cons for sure, where sometimes you do have to explain some simpler things. So here's a fun thing. I have locks, and so here they call it in English reggae hair. And so having to explain that that's not exactly right is one thing, or sometimes people are really curious. They do it in a good way, but they'll, touch or pull my hair on a bus with my headphones in. I've had kids pull my hair and then the parents pull my hair after saying sorry, or older people will do that too, or
After saying sorry?
yeah. Or, kids are kids. So you walk in the classroom and they're like, Black in Korean. And it's like, yes. And,
Mm.
it's just like, where do we go from here? But more often than not, it just comes from being curious, or maybe I'm living in Daegu, so a lot of Koreans might not be able to see foreigners in their everyday life here. And so maybe this is the first time in years that they've seen a foreigner and I'm Black. And then I say I'm not from Africa, I'm from America. So then they're like, yeah, are you military? And then I'm like, no, I'm a teacher.
Interesting. Okay.
There's a strong military culture here because we
Okay.
have a lot of military bases as well. And they hold your breath if you're a military or teacher. It's just so much as far as like my experiences here in that sense.
I just wanted to touch it honestly because I feel like
Mhm.
how could we not? And I know it can be like you said, uh, there's a line between curiosity and disrespect. There's a
I
balance there.
understand.
So, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 um, but no, I mean, this is amazing. The one thing I did want to follow up with you on that you said is that you order your meal and then you get the sides
Yeah.
free. What are we getting?
Oh, so a lot of the time it's either seasonal vegetables. So a lot of the side dishes are like vegetables that are either fermented or prepared using gochujang, which is a special kind of pepper that's really strongly a part of Korean culture. So you could find that like I most of the vegetables are some micronutrients sometimes, or some of the microfibers, or some blend of like the spinach family, but not spinach. And it just depends on whether you go in January or February, even.
Okay,
So some
wow.
places every month it changes.
Mm.
But you could also find most of the time kimchi, as well as something that's like a pickled or fermented. I want to say it's pickled and not fermented, but a pickled radish. I love radishes, and I found that out in Korea. Oh my God. When you order fried chicken here, it usually comes with like a container of just pickled radish, and it is so good. Like, why don't we do this? So it usually comes with like kimchi, pickled radish, some other side dishes that are like greens or vegetables that are prepared a certain way. You
Mhm.
might get nuts or something else, or even like corn or other things in the mayo. I don't know if you know about japchae, but that's what I thought I was getting when I was coming to Korea, and I hardly ever see. So that's one
Interesting.
of the things where it's like maybe I was disappointed in that. It turned out I love this thing that I can never find anywhere unless it's a very specific place. But Koreans eat it in their home, but
Okay.
it's harder to find in a restaurant. But how can I find it at home?
Oh, can you tell us what those ingredients are for our listeners?
So it includes some kind of glass noodle. It's a clear noodle that I believe is made from sweet potato starch, but don't quote me on that.
Mm.
But you need the noodle. That's not the hard part. The hard part is boiling it for long enough and then, cooling it down so you can mix it with sesame oil, some sliced vegetables like carrot and cucumber and some other stuff, sometimes onion, and you mix it all together, but I believe that's like the very, very basic version of japchae.
Okay.
Mhm.
I want to talk to you about I want to talk to you about games. I know that you love games. I know, and you said earlier that you're competitive. See, what's funny is like I love games, but I'm not competitive. Like
Mhm.
you can win. It doesn't matter that much to me. I don't need to win.
Mhm.
Um, I think when I play against myself, like my Wordle streak is over a
Oh,
thousand.
wow.
And I refuse to not play Wordle. Like that's my thing. I will not break my streak. But everything else, like connections and
Yeah.
the crossword puzzle, I get to it when I get to it. But I know you have a connection with language and games. So I would love for you to talk to us about Speak in Spades and how that started and what you're doing with it and what it means to you.
Games mean everything to me. Two things that mean everything to me are games and languages. They're just ways to connect with other people, see how other people's brains work. And I don't, this is 100% not why I'm competitive. This is a potential reason for why, but I just feel like giving my all in the moment can show how I think, how I am, and like, I want all of the other people's all, so that this way, like, I'm really good at games where you could spot a liar, or I'm good at those like hidden role games, that logic or things like that. Like, give me your best so that I could challenge myself. It's almost like I'm competing against myself, but there's a bunch of different computers at one. I want the
Mhm.
best of all of that. And so it feels like I'm in a championship every time I'm playing a game. Like, give me your best because I want to see how good I could be if you give me your best. Card games are my favorite.
Okay.
A deck of cards, just a deck of cards, has so much meaning. You're from New York, so you probably know. Growing up, cards are the way that we pass time in school. Even after school, you got games like spades, where, it's an easy way to play with your family or your grandparents or your uncles. But when you run out of things to talk about, you play a game, And it's so cool where if two people know a game, then it's like you're connected already. And if
Right.
two people don't know a game and then you teach a game, now you've formed a connection.
Mhm.
And so it was just such an easy way where growing up, some people have never played the games I know. My grandma just taught it to me last week, but I need to practice because I need to beat grandma because she beat me up last week, you know? So I need to practice the rules. And then
Right.
there's that cycle of like just wanting to understand the rules so that I could play my own way. In language, you do a similar thing. Once you know the rules, you create your own personality, or you
Mm.
also are absorbing an aspect of other people's language, but you're able to also communicate. And if you don't know the rules and if you don't know the language, if you learn it, it opens up so much more. And I come to Korea and I teach my students cards. They don't even So in Korea, playing with cards almost feels like gambling in a way, and I say that very lightly, but like they have a certain stigma with using playing cards. So
Mm,
even I had to persuade my co-teachers before teaching a card game in the classroom because it's just not common to have a deck of cards in the classroom. And so when I did use it, eyes were open. They like, what? You could do that? And I'm like, next week I could show you a different game with the same cards. I know at least 30 different games with a single deck of cards. And that's pretty much how the playing cards ended up starting. Like,
mm,
I've learned from so many other people. We love a concept of stories, but we also love a concept of challenging our brains. And that's been a part of history in many different aspects of life,
mhm.
whether it's a board game, a video game, tells stories and has messages, or even just like physical games like soccer and basketball. We need to connect.
Right.
And so I'm just an advocate for board games and card
I
games.
love that. So tell me what you are working on now with Speak in Spades, and tell me what you are working on with that platform, and tell me a bit. I mentioned it at the start of this episode. Tell me about the language school, and tell me about other ways that you're able to integrate games and language learning together.
So right now, Speaking Spades is more of my personal journey. But if you scroll back on Instagram, you could see how it started with this passion for a language journal, which I still have a PDF of. And I'm trying to figure out the best way to either share all of it or transform it for the language school and expand on it and be able to keep it alive in that way. But Speaking Spades started as a way for me to get into language education online by sharing resources. I wanted to get out of the regular, like just being a teacher in one classroom and really apply the principles of what I think are important for language education out there. So it started with a journal that was way more open ended than a lot of textbooks and just allowed you to really explore yourself in another language. Well, guided and still allowing you to take notes. Then it turned into the playing cards with language challenges on the playing cards, which I slowly thought of as just conversation starters, honestly. I've used them in all of my classrooms. I've taught it all. And it's been consistently a way to just break the ice and also take the take the everyday grammar and stuff out of it and just helping people realize I can understand a lot more than I think, or I
Mhm.
can at least say words and still pass, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Because you're so busy wanting to play that you're not thinking about being perfect. You're just like, okay, can we keep going now? Like, you know? So those were the two products that I started with. And at some points you see that. Now it's just sharing my life in Korea, some of the language achievements that I've made, being able to sing in competitions in Korean with my
Yes.
husband, which is
Yes.
crazy.
Awesome.
Crazy to say out loud. You know, still crazy to say out loud, or even that I am hosting a language exchange is
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
So, I started speaking Spades in Korea during COVID
Mhm.
while teaching. And so, even every part of speaking Spades is just like a part of my language and culture journey in Korea and
Yeah.
just discovering myself and what is language for me. So to be able to answer most of your questions today, I'm so grateful to even have this kind of passion for something and that you're interested in my story because of something that I had shared. You know, it's just a crazy full circle
Yeah.
moment. So that's what Speaking Spades is to me. But for the language school, I've been so blessed to finally bring my husband into the language education field. So he's a really good Korean who speaks English. He's really good at speaking English, but he learned in a way that I also learned Korean, right? And so he has the kind of mentality that I have with learning languages. Our mission and our goals align, where we are trying to focus on building that confidence and building speaking from the start so
Mm.
that the other fields make it happens more naturally and in a way that's truly fun. And we challenge our students in a way where they're not using much of a textbook at all. We're teaching you what you need in order to survive, and we're challenging you with conversation practice in each class to use what you know. You
Yeah.
only know the basics. Practice that for 30 minutes with your
Right.
classmates. Practice that with your teachers so that this way you are ready for the next lesson, but you're applying it to real life. Plus, if they're in Korea, they're using it outside. And if
Mm,
they're international students, then they get to learn with a native speaker that's teaching them Daegu Korean. That makes sense. Tiki Taka is the name of the language exchange and the name of my husband's business. But following my husband's Instagram and his content on YouTube or TikTok is all a way of supporting my vision as well of opening this school.
that's so, so very exciting and a great, amazing step for the two of you to be in business this way and sharing your love of games and language
Yeah.
and bringing that together and helping people learn also. Please let us know the name of the school. Let us know where
Mhm.
we can find you.
The easiest way to see everything that we offer is on our Instagram accounts. So if you want to just see me and my journey, I understand. My name is Tiara, Tiara, dot speak in spades. If you're interested in my husband's Korean classes or his online content, so much to offer there. It's Mail. It's spelled Mail. Actually, Mail Hail. Mail means every day. So everyday hail, which is his name. So
Okay.
you'll find content every day for him. And the name of our school slash language exchange is Tiki Taka. And there's a fun story for that as well. So Tiki Taka is the sound of like ping pong or tennis, but it's like a flow of conversation.
Mhm.
But we decided to add Tiki Taka, so it's a flow
Ah.
of conversation. So
Mhm.
it's called Tiki Taka Club.
I love it. You very cool, very cool, very memorable name. I will add the links to all of those in the show notes for this episode so that people who are listening will be able to click and contact you and get in touch with you and check out your content and sign up for classes right away.
Hmm. Thank you so, so much.
Absolutely. Tiara, I've had so much fun talking with you. And it's like this time has flown by because I just looked at the time and I'm like, holy smokes, I feel like we just started talking. I love what you're doing. I think that you are just so inspirational to me and hopefully to others. But I think all the work that you're doing and all the mindfulness that you have around learning and teaching and just joy and having fun, I think is so very inspirational, aspirational. We need more people in the world with an attitude like yours. And thank you for sharing your story and your time with me today. I like to end each episode with the same question. And this is always kind of fun for people who have an arsenal of languages to choose
Right?
from. But I would love to know if you have any jokes, popular sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words,
Mhm.
idioms, proverbs, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Korean or in Latin or in ancient Greek to share and to teach us.
Here's a really cool one. So maybe, I'm not sure if this is 100% correct anymore, but in the US, if you're heavy-handed or big-handed, that means that you give a lot, right? Or like maybe you give a lot of food, is it? Or I can't remember another meaning for it, but I know heavy-handed could have multiple meanings and they could be neutral or not so good. But here, the equivalent is like son, son이 크다, like having a big hand, and that means you're kind. And so it's a really like big-hearted. It kind of has that meaning. And so that's one of my favorite sayings. So big hand, if you're heavy-handed, then just own it that you're giving and really kind
Yeah.
because it kind of ties into even food in Korea again. where they give you more. They really care about whether you're hungry or not, or like you're never gonna leave a place hungry, or even
Yeah.
the way that they ask you instead of how are you. Sometimes they'll ask you, did you eat? Because they're always concerned about food. So it's a good thing to find a person who has a big hand.
Can you please teach me how to say it? I'm gonna write it phonetically so I can
Mm-hmm.
copy after you.
Mm-hmm. Son
Son
y
y
크다.
kada.
Mm-hmm.
Son y kada.
Mm-hmm. 손이 크다.
Kada.
Mm-hmm.
Son y kada.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so that means you have a big hand.
How fun. I am pumped. I'm excited to learn so much more about
Mhm.
Korean from this conversation. Before I let you go, Tiara,
Mhm.
first, thank you so much again. But before I let you go,
Mhm.
really quickly, without thinking, if you are having a conversation such as this one, let's say you just kick my butt at spades, because like I said, I don't know how to play. But it's time for you to go home and you are about to say goodbye. So if we were in Korea, what would be the best way to say goodbye?
First thought, I don't think about anything. Ja. But you kind of have to slap your. You've probably seen it somewhere, but it has to be like ja, like
Very
it kind of
dramatic.
is a like a well, well.
Mm.
hmm So that's the first one I could think of.
I love that. I love that. I love that. So it's very
Mhm.
dramatic. It's respectful though. It's not like
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like the symbol. So you can rub your leg instead of doing the big slap. You can look around. Like,
Okay. Well,
uh-huh.
Tiara, thank you so much for this conversation. I had a great time speaking with you, and I will speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me on this. This was way more fun than I could have ever imagined. I thought I was gonna be shy, but instead I'm just like, I can't wait for the next one. Thank you, thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
New episodes of Speaking Tongues are available every Monday, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to like and share episodes with other language lovers like yourselves.